Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're the place where plunge into history, art, ideas, looking for those, hidden connections that shape things.
That's right, trying to make sense of the currents underneath the surface.
And today we're tackling a pretty big question, I think. How do truly revolutionary ideas actually spread? And maybe more importantly, how do they change when they cross borders?
That's crucial. We tend to think of big movements like, say, the avant-garde in their early 20th century as these solid blocks, right? Monolithic things.
Exactly. But what happens when a really radical idea, something designed to just break everything, lands somewhere completely different, a different cultural soil, so to speak?
Does it just arrive intact, like a perfect message delivered? Or
Yeah.
does it adapt? Does it transform, like a
Yeah.
seed taking root in new ground?
That's a fantastic way to put it. And it's very rare for an idea just to transplant itself without changing, isn't it?
Oh, almost never. The local context, existing traditions, the political climate, they all act like filters. They reshape that incoming influence into something, well, often quite distinct from the original. It's a real interplay, not just passive acceptance.
And that dynamic interplay is exactly what we're going to explore today. We're doing a deep dive into futurism. But not just futurism globally, we're focusing specifically on its really fascinating and I think quite unique journey through Spanish literature.
Ah, yes. It's a fantastic case study. A story of adoption, sure, but also adaptation, even outright reinvention. And it gives us some pretty surprising insights into how cultures grapple with modernity, how they embrace it, resist it, and ultimately reshape it.
So our mission today is really to unpack how this movement, which was born from this intense desire for radical rupture with the past, almost a demolition job on tradition,
Absolutely. Demolition is a good word for Marinetti's initial vision.
how that movement found a totally distinctive voice and purpose in Spain. We want to chart its path, historically, look at the key players, and figure out why it still matters for how we understand change versus tradition, especially in times of big societal shifts.
And the sources we're drawing on for this deep dive, they really paint a rich picture of that historical moment. They reveal just how nuanced these adaptations were in Spain. It's not just a little footnote in art history.
No, not at all. It feels more like a testament to that dynamic between global influence and local identity. A really vivid illustration of how ideas actually evolve in the real world.
And for you, listening in, get ready for maybe an aha moment. Because as we explore how this drive for the new could also, kind of paradoxically, be deeply rooted, well, you might start seeing innovation differently. In any field, really.
Yeah, like in tech, business, maybe even just personal growth. How do you embrace the future without losing sight of, what defines you?
That's the core question, isn't it? Something to ponder as we go through this.
Okay, let's get into it then. To really understand futurism in Spain, we absolutely have to start at the beginning. The incendiary spark, its birth in Italy, and the force behind it all. Filippo Tommaso Marinetti.
Ah, Marinetti. You can't talk futurism without him. He wasn't just a poet. He was a provocateur, a visionary, a whirlwind of energy, almost a cultural bomb thrower in his zeal to destroy the past.
Cultural bomb thrower, I like that. So tell us about him. He's the central figure, right? The architect.
Undeniably, Filippo Tommaso Marinetti, Italian poet, playwright.
Yeah.
He's the conceptual architect, the engine, the relentless promoter of futurism. His vision wasn't just about a new style of art or poetry. No, it was much bigger. He wanted to fundamentally change how society saw itself, its relationship with history, culture, progress.
So what was he reacting against?
He saw the art of his time as stagnant, academic, overly sentimental. Think dusty museums, classical reverence. He wanted none of it. He saw himself leading a revolution against all that.
And he didn't exactly whisper his ideas into the world. He launched futurism with a bang, didn't he? With the Manifesto del Futurismo.
Oh, absolutely. It wasn't some quiet academic paper. It was a public declaration, a battle cry, really.
Yeah.
A declaration of war on everything old, everything traditional.
What was actually in it? I mean, what made it so explosive?
Well, the content was as shocking as how he published it. It championed speed, technology, machines, youth, and violence. It famously declared, and our sources quote this, "We will glorify war, the world's only hygiene militarism, patriotism, the destructive gesture of freedom bringers, beautiful ideas worth dying for, and scorn for woman."
Wow, okay. Scorn for women, glorify war. That's
I know.
incredibly provocative, even now, let alone in 1909.
Exactly. It didn't stop there. It proclaimed a desire to destroy the museums, libraries, academies of every kind, and to glorify every form of rebellion. It was a complete, utter, violent rejection of historical and artistic tradition. Total rupture.
It really does sound like he wanted to burn everything down and start again. And the way he published it was just as important, wasn't it? It wasn't tucked away somewhere.
No, no, that was part of the strategy. Its first major public appearance wasn't in some niche Italian literary journal. It exploded onto the European scene in Le Figaro, a major French daily newspaper, in February 1909.
In French, in Paris.
Yes, publishing it in French in a widely read international paper like Le Figaro instantly gave it this huge platform, immense visibility. It showed Marinetti had global ambitions right from the very start. He wasn't just talking to Italy.
Talk about making an entrance and the impact. It was pretty immediate, right? It didn't just stay in Italy.
No, it spread rapidly. Despite its initial base being primarily Italian artists and writers, the movement's influence shot across Europe very quickly. And this wasn't just organic drift, it was a deliberate campaign.
How so? How did they push it out?
Well, the manifesto itself was swiftly translated into other languages, Spanish included, crucially for our story, and then published in various political and literary magazines across Europe. Plus, Marinetti's other works, his experimental poetry, his Words and Freedom stuff, also started appearing in these publications.
So he was actively seeding his ideas everywhere.
Precisely. He was performing his poems, giving lectures, creating futurist evenings that were often designed to provoke riots. He understood publicity. This strategic distribution, it highlights a key trend, doesn't it? For a movement to go global, it often needs that concerted, almost evangelical push from its founders. They have to actively export, translate, perform its ideas across borders.
Okay, now here's something really interesting our sources point out, and it adds crucial context. Marinetti himself, especially in this early phase, is described as a revolutionist and non-fascist. Why is that distinction important?
Oh, it's absolutely vital. Because, yes, later on, particularly in the 1920s, Italian Futurism became deeply explicitly entangled with Mussolini's fascist regime. Marinetti himself joined the fascist party.
But his initial spark, the original 1909 impulse, came from somewhere else.
Exactly. That original motivation seems to have been less about specific state politics and more about this universal philosophy of constant dynamic change, a rejection of bourgeois values, of tradition, of anything stagnant. His initial targets were the academic establishment, sentimental art, museums, institutions he saw as preserving a dead past.
So it began as more of a cultural and artistic rebellion. Pure, unadulterated rebellion against stagnation itself before it got tied up with specific political ideologies.
I think that's a fair assessment of the very beginning. He wanted to shock society awake, make it aware of the new modern world emerging around them, the speed, the machines, the noise.
So let's nail down that fundamental idea he was pushing. The world is constantly changing. That was the core, right?
That's the absolute core. And because the world is changing, old traditions, old ideas, old styles, old ways of thinking and feeling in art and literature, they must be abandoned. Not maybe, not gradually. Must, now.
It wasn't a suggestion. It was an imperative, a demand.
Absolutely, a call to action. Pivot towards the new, the original, the current. It wasn't just about being different. It was about being now. Reflecting the accelerating pace of life, the roar of the machine, the thrill of speed. He literally wrote about the beauty of speed, comparing a racing car to the classical sculpture Victory of Samothrace.
And his justification for this radical shift was tied directly to what he saw happening in society.
Yes, he explicitly connected it. He underlined that living conditions, political dynamics, scientific research, and technology change. Society is transforming. Think automobiles, airplanes, factories, electricity. The very fabric of life was changing at lightning speed.
So his point was, if life is changing so drastically, how can art stay the same?
Precisely. How can our art, our literature, our thinking not adapt? To cling to the past, in his view, was to become irrelevant.
Yeah.
A museum piece yourself. Old artistic languages, classical myths, pastoral scenes, and they just couldn't capture this new, noisy, fast reality.
So what did he propose instead, artistically?
He advocated for things like wireless imagination and words and freedom, parole and libertà, breaking down syntax, using typography creatively, trying to convey the disjointed, fragmented, simultaneous sensations of modern life. He even highlighted Futurism as being important for more liberal and combative communities, signaling its rebellious spirit, its challenge to any status quo, artistic, social, whatever, that try to hold back progress.
Now, what's really striking is that Marinetti didn't just hope these ideas would catch on. He actively planned their spread. Our sources mention him writing a specific piece aimed directly at Spain. Proclama futurista a los españoles, a futurist proclamation to the Spanish. How significant was that?
Oh, that was hugely significant and very strategic. His initial works, like the Manifesto, were already being translated and discussed in Spain. But then he took this extra step, writing something specifically for them.
So it wasn't just a general broadcast, it was a targeted message.
Exactly. A direct appeal, an open invitation, almost a challenge to the Spanish public, Spanish artists, Spanish writers.
Yeah.
He was trying to deliberately plant the seed for the movement's expansion there. It shows he understood that building international influence isn't just organic. It often requires careful, targeted outreach. He was essentially knocking on Spain's door personally.
Saying, hey, this revolution, it's for you too.
Pretty much.
Which brings us perfectly to Futurism's actual arrival in Spain and the role of the vanguardistas. So Marinetti's efforts, his proclamation, they clearly paid off. But he wasn't dropping these ideas into a void, was he? Spain wasn't just passively waiting.
You're absolutely right. The ground in Spain was already quite fertile for new ideas. Spain had its own modernist stirrings, its own intense debates about tradition versus modernity. Our sources tell us that at the beginning of the 20th century, there was already this group of Spanish authors, poets, artists known as the vanguardistas.
Which just means modernists or avant-gardists, right?
Exactly. And these individuals weren't waiting for Marinetti to tell them what to do. They were already paving the way for modern movements in art and literature in Spain.
Yeah.
They were already experimenting, questioning, pushing boundaries.
So what was going on in Spain around that time? What was the specific context that made them receptive?
Well, Spain in the early 1900s was in a really complex place. They'd recently lost their last major colonies, Cuba, Puerto Rico, the Philippines in 1898. The disaster of 98, they called it.
Right. That must have been a huge national shock.
Immense. It plunged the country into this period of deep, soul-searching self-critique. It gave rise to the intellectual movement known as the Generation of 98. These writers and thinkers were obsessed with Spain's perceived decline, its place in modern Europe. They were calling for national regeneration, for modernization, for opening up to European ideas.
So there was already an appetite for change, for new thinking.
Definitely. But at the same time, the political reality was a conservative monarchy, a lot of social unrest, and significant state censorship under the restored Bourbon monarchy. So you had this intellectual ferment pushing for the new, colliding with a traditional, somewhat repressive political structure. Marinetti's ideas landed right in the middle of that tension.
Okay, so it wasn't starting from zero. His work, as our sources say, profoundly influenced the whole country and planted the seed that would expand the movement in Spain in a short time. But it sounds like it was accelerating something already in motion.
I think that's a very good way to put it. It gave a focus, a name, maybe an international validation to impulses that were already bubbling up. And that acceleration was really quite quick.
How quick?
Futurism showed its influence in Spain very soon after its Italian genesis. This wasn't a slow diffusion over decades. It was a pretty rapid adoption and adaptation, almost immediate in some cases.
And one of the key pioneers mentioned is Ramon Gómez de la Serna. He's highlighted as someone whose work really showed futurist influence early on.
Yes, Gómez de la Serna is absolutely central to this early phase, a hugely important figure.
What's really intriguing, though, is that our sources say his futurist-tinged contributions started manifesting from 1908 onwards. 1908, that's before the big Le Figaro Manifesto in 1909. What does that tell us?
That detail is fascinating, isn't it? It's quite striking. If the manifesto hit the headlines in 1909, Serna's activity from 1908 suggests, well, a couple of possibilities. Maybe a very strong pre-existing receptiveness in Spain. Perhaps he encountered Marinetti's earlier ideas through other channels. Marinetti was active before 1909.
Or maybe.
Or, perhaps more likely, it suggests a parallel development. Independent modernist impulses bubbling up in Spain that just happened to align perfectly with what Marinetti was formulating. Gómez de la Serna was already creating his famous Gregorias around this time.
Ah, the Gregorias. Explain those a bit.
They're unique. Very short, often just a single sentence. A kind of witty, poetic, metaphorical observation like, milk is water dressed as a bride, or the moon is the porthole of the night. They capture fleeting moments, unexpected connections, often with a humorous, modern sensibility.
So sharp, concise, capturing modern life. That does sound futurist adjacent, even if it wasn't directly influenced at first.
Exactly. It has that spirit of dynamism, novelty, breaking from more staid forms. It suggests there was a certain European zeitgeist, a shared feeling across borders that new forms were needed for a new century.
So, okay, individuals like Gomez de la Serna are picking up on this or developing similar ideas. But how did it spread more broadly? It wasn't just writers reading manifestos in isolation, right?
No, definitely not. The movement gained traction through very social means, which makes sense in Spain with its strong cafe culture and intellectual circles. It apparently began in literary meetings. Think salons, tertulias, gatherings in places like the Ateneo de Madrid, a famous cultural hub.
So people were getting together, talking, debating these new ideas.
Precisely. Organized by these enlightened writers. These meetings would have been vibrant spaces for hashing out ideas, championing the new avant-garde stuff. And from there, the ideas and the name Futurism spread through various magazines.
Which magazines were important?
While Gomez de la Serna himself edited Prometeo, which was key. Later, magazines like Ultra, the namesake of the Ultras movement, which had strong futurist links. These publications were crucial for getting avant-garde ideas out to a wider audience. Beyond those initial intimate circles, they amplified the message.
Now, here's where it gets really fascinating, I think. Futurism in Spain became more than just an artistic style. It became, according to our sources, a tool for dissent, a way to protest.
Yes, this is absolutely critical for understanding the Spanish adaptation. Remember that context we talked about. The conservative ruling order, the censorship. Direct political protest was difficult, even dangerous.
So these intellectuals were actively protesting the oppression and censorship of the ruling order in that period, and they used futurism to do it.
They leveraged its innovative style and perceptions in literature as a coded way to counter the ongoing order. Think about it. Futurism's core message was rebellion against tradition, against the old ways, embracing the shock of the new. In a place like Spain at that time, that message itself had potent political undertones.
So adopting a radical artistic style was itself a political act.
Absolutely. It wasn't just about aesthetics. It served a deeper strategic purpose. By championing artistic innovation, by breaking the rules of grammar and form, they were implicitly challenging the rigid social and political rules of the regime. It was a way to fight back, to express discontent, to signal allegiance with modernity and progress, without necessarily making overt political statements that would get them censored or arrested.
That highlights a really powerful historical trend, doesn't it? How art movements often become vehicles for social or political rebellion, especially when other avenues are closed off. They offer a new language, a way to subvert the status quo.
Precisely. Think about the futurist love of fragmentation, speed, noise, dynamism. It's the complete opposite of the orderly, traditional, often stagnant and silent conformity that authoritarian regimes tend to prefer. So embracing that aesthetic was a form of resistance, a subtle, maybe but powerful way to keep critical thought alive and circulate new ideas under the radar.
Okay, this leads us right into what I think is the real core of our deep dive today. The distinctive path of Spanish futurism, its unique historical adaptation. This is where the story really diverges from Italy, isn't it?
This is absolutely the crux of it. This is where we see cultural adaptation in action and where that aha moment starts to come into focus. Let's just quickly restate the Italian stance for contrast.
Right, Marinetti's original vision.
Marinetti and the Italian futurists were adamant. Previous ideas, literary styles, and lifestyles cannot have strong links with the present. Any link to the past, they argued, would make it difficult to open the doors for the future. It was all about radical rupture, total break. Remember, destroy the museums. That sentiment.
Complete demolition. A clean slate. Sounds pretty extreme. But in Spain, our sources say the aim was totally different. They aimed at building an original futurism with its roots in the past, but focusing on the future.
Exactly. Roots in the past, but focusing on the future. That phrase captures the fundamental difference, the key historical adaptation. It's almost paradoxical, isn't it? Rooted futurism.
It really is. It sounds like a contradiction in terms, but that's what they were trying to do.
That seems to be the core of the Spanish innovation. It wasn't just mimicking Italy. It was a profound reinterpretation, an act of cultural translation that reshaped the movement's DNA for the Spanish context. It shows so clearly how a big, powerful cultural current gets filtered, nuanced, transformed by local history, local values, local anxieties.
So instead of pure revolution, they were aiming for an evolution.
Yeah.
An evolution that somehow honored their heritage while still embracing the new.
I think that's a very good way to describe it. They weren't rejecting the past wholesale.
So what did this rooted futurism actually look like? What were its characteristics? How did they manage to be futurist and hold on to the past?
Well, our sources indicate it still maintained a strong commitment to original and dynamic perceptions. They definitely still valued the new, the energetic, the modern. They still had that appreciation of modernism in its various forms. So they weren't anti-modernist at all.
Okay, so the forward-looking part was still there.
Absolutely. But the defining characteristic, the thing that really set it apart, was this deliberate choice not to make a total break with the past. They sought to integrate historical grounding somehow. They weren't, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. They were trying to find a way to bathe the baby in new modern water
Yeah.
without ditching its heritage entirely.
So it was still, as the source says, an insurgent stance and a rebellion against the established order because it was pursuing the new. But it took a more nuanced path regarding tradition. Less purely revolutionary, more evolutionary.
Exactly. Which, you could argue, might have been a more sustainable approach for that specific cultural landscape. It was complex.
How did this play out in someone like Ramon Gomez de la Serna, whom we mentioned earlier?
Well, think about his Gregorias again. While they felt fresh, witty, and modern in their form and perspective, they often drew on very everyday Spanish realities, observations of common life, playing with the Spanish language itself in a way that felt both innovative and deeply connected to a national sensibility.
So taking everyday stuff, maybe traditional observations, and giving them a sharp, modern, futurist twist.
Precisely. He wasn't writing about abstract machines necessarily, or glorifying war in the same way Marinetti did. He was finding the poetry, the surprise, the modern angle within the familiar, innovating within a recognizably Spanish cultural framework, rather than trying to import something completely alien.
And what about Gabriel Alomar? He's also mentioned in connection with this adapted futurism.
Elomar was a really interesting figure, a Catalan intellectual, very involved in discussions about Spanish modernization and connecting Spain more to Europe. His take on futurism, while embracing its energy and forward look, often framed it in terms of renewing Spanish identity.
So not erasing the past, but maybe channeling Spain's historical energies into a new, modern direction.
Exactly, using the vigor of futurism to revitalize a sense of national purpose, rather than advocating for a complete break. So you see these key figures, they're navigating this delicate balance in their own ways. How to be modern in Spanish, how to innovate without total amnesia.
Which brings us back to that central question. Why this adaptation? Why did Spain go for this rooted futurism instead of the Italian demolition job? What was it about Spain or Spanish identity that led them down this path?
Well, our sources explicitly say they wanted to protest while creating an original futurism. Connecting that to the wider context, we can speculate on a few intertwined reasons. First, pragmatism, meaning, given the intense censorship and the conservative political climate, maybe a full-throated Marinetti-style rejection of all tradition was just too dangerous, too easily suppressed. A rooted futurism could introduce new artistic ideas, new ways of seeing, more subtly. It could be revolutionary in form without being quite so overtly offensive to a deeply traditional, largely Catholic society.
So a strategic choice. A way to get new ideas past the gatekeepers by couching them slightly differently.
Possibly. It might have made the movement more palatable and maybe ultimately more effective as a tool for dissent in that specific environment, but there's likely more to it than just strategy.
Like what?
Like a genuine reflection of Spanish intellectual identity at the time. The generation of '98, they were already grappling with how to modernize Spain without losing its soul, its essential Spanishness. For many Spanish intellectuals, even those eager for change, the idea of complete cultural self-erasure, which Marinetti seemed to flirt with, might have been just unthinkable. Un-Spanish, perhaps?
So they valued their own history too much. They wanted to innovate from within their own cultural story, not just import something wholesale.
I think that's a very strong possibility. It wasn't about rejecting modernity, but about creating a Spanish modernity, one that acknowledged and maybe even drew strength from its unique past.
That's a really crucial distinction. It shows how these big movements aren't just passively adopted, they're actively wrestled with, reinterpreted, reshaped by the places they land. It's a two-way street, isn't it? Influence and transformation going both ways.
Absolutely. It shows that the ideas that often stick, the adaptations that endure, are frequently the ones that manage to connect with existing values or narratives, even while pushing for change. It's a kind of intelligent evolution, recognizing that culture is a continuous stream, not just a series of unconnected islands.
This nuanced Spanish approach, it really offers a powerful lesson, doesn't it? About how movements get remade by the cultural and political landscapes they meet. It's a great case study in cultural hybridity.
It really is.
Yeah.
It demonstrates that Maybe the most profound innovations aren't always the ones that burn everything down, but the ones that find creative ways to build bridges between the past and the future.
Okay, so as we start to wrap up this deep dive, let's try to synthesize the core message of futurism itself in all its variations, and then maybe zoom out to think about its broader significance. At its heart, futurism was fundamentally a challenge to standing still, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Fundamentally, it was about embracing constant evolution, demanding a forward-looking perspective, a total rejection of stagnation. It championed the new, more original and current over anything seen as outdated. It was an aesthetic built on speed, technology, energy, trying desperately to make art catch up with a rapidly changing world.
And this movement, it didn't just pop up out of nowhere. Its rise, both in Italy and Spain, seems deeply tied to what was happening in the world at that time, the early 20th century. It really mirrors huge societal shifts.
Oh, completely. You have to remember the context. This period saw this incredible explosion of technology. Cars becoming common, airplanes taking flight, electricity transforming cities, radio, cinema starting. It was bewildering.
Plus rapid industrialization, cities booming.
And huge political upheaval, too. Old empires were crumbling, new ideologies were rising, nationalism was intensifying, all building towards the catastrophe of World War I. Movements like Futurism, they often erupt as these direct, visceral responses to such profound changes. They reflect both the anxieties and the sometimes terrifying, sometimes exhilarating hopes that these shifts create. Art trying to process a world that felt like it was accelerating uncontrollably.
So it underlines that broader principle. Art isn't just decoration. It's often a mirror, maybe even a driver of what's happening in society. New styles emerge to make sense of new realities, right?
Absolutely. It's a pattern throughout history. Think of the Renaissance reflecting a new human-centered view, or Romanticism responding to revolution and individualism, or later, Cubism grappling with fractured perspectives in a new century. Art is always in dialogue with its time. Futurism, with its obsession with speed and machines, just perfectly captured the zeitgeist of the specific moment, a world scrambling to understand itself amid relentless technological change.
And the fact that it manifested differently in Italy and Spain just adds another layer, showing how those global forces get negotiated locally.
Precisely.
So bringing it back to the listener, what does this whole deep dive into futurism's journey in Spain tell you about the nature of change itself? This story, with these two quite different futurist paths, offers a really nuanced lesson, I think.
It really highlights those two contrasting approaches we've unpacked. Italy's call for radical total rupture versus Spain's more integrated, rooted in the past evolution. And isn't just some dusty academic point. It feels like a recurring pattern in how big, revolutionary ideas get adopted and adapted around the world. It shows there's often more than one way to engage with the future.
And that's where the reflection for you, the listener, comes in. When you're faced with calls for radical change, maybe in your community, your job, your own life, how do you or how do societies balance that push for the new with the weight of history and tradition? Is it always an either?
This deep dive suggests maybe not. Maybe the path chosen total break versus integration can be just as significant as the change itself. It suggests that sometimes perhaps the most profound, the most authentic innovations are the ones that manage to build those bridges between what was and what's coming.
Rather than just focusing on burning them down.
Right. It's a reminder that embracing the future doesn't always have to mean erasing the past. Sometimes it might involve a creative re-engagement with history, letting tradition inform and enrich what's new, rather than just acting as an obstacle.
We've covered a lot of ground today, haven't we? It's been quite a journey.
It has indeed.
From Marinetti's incendiary manifestos in Italy that call for a complete break through futurism's powerful spread across Europe, and then landing on its unique, rooted adaptation in Spain with the vanguardistas, who found a way to innovate without completely abandoning their historical foundations.
It really underscores that dynamic relationship between global ideas and local identities, a fascinating chapter in how cultures navigate change. The Spanish experience really teaches us that innovation is rarely just one thing. It's usually a complex negotiation, a dialogue between the universal and the particular, the past and the future.
So, as we all navigate our own constantly changing world, this deep dive into futurism in Spain leaves us with a pretty big question for you, the listener. How do you decide? Which parts of the past are anchors, giving strength and identity, and which are just weights, holding back progress? When you look to the future, is it always about ditching the old entirely?
Or could it be that the most profound, The most original innovations sometimes emerge from that nuanced, deliberate dialogue with what came before.
Maybe consider this. The next time you encounter a groundbreaking idea or a call for radical change, think about its potential journey. When it meets a new context, your context, will it demand total revolution? Or could it inspire a more integrated evolution?
We really encourage you to think about how these historical patterns of adaptation and transformation might apply to the challenges, the opportunities in your own lives, your own fields. The lessons from early 20th century Spanish literature are maybe more relevant than you'd think.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next time with another exploration into the ideas that continue to shape our world.